In this video, we're going to talk about the truth on carbs and whether low-carb diets are the way to go. Hey everyone, my name is Tino. I have a master's in nutrition and I post weekly videos on plant-based nutrition, fitness, and vegan lifestyle tips. So if you're new here, definitely subscribe. So a very popular topic in nutrition is low-carb dieting. Many people claim that we should be limiting or avoiding carbs in order to be as healthy and slim as possible. But are these claims true? I talked with Dr. Milton Mills, a medical doctor at the United Medical Center in Washington, D.C., and who was also featured in the popular film What the Health, and here's what he had to say. I want to get your thoughts on carbohydrates. There seems to be this notion that it's the cause to the diabetes and obesity epidemic. What are your thoughts on that?
One of the most pernicious trends in sort of modern nutrition is this low-carb foolishness. People think that they're actually doing something that's good for them by going low-carb, but they aren't, because our bodies need carbs. Every day, 25% of the energy you burn is used up by your brain alone. The human brain only weighs 3 pounds, but uses 25% of the energy we burn every day. And it's all in the form of sugar. So, carbohydrates, glucose. That's what the brain uses. Right. And that's why when people who have diabetes, if their blood sugar level goes too low, they will go into a coma because the brain cannot function without it. So our bodies are designed to utilize starch, utilize carbohydrates. The problem comes when we take in the wrong types of carbohydrates, and I'll explain that in a minute. But the fact is that human beings are so adapted to a starch-based diet that we actually have 6 times more starch-digesting enzymes than any other primate. The problem with carbs is the fact that in most Western countries, people are eating processed carbs. And by processed carbs, what I mean is they're eating refined sugar and they're eating grains that have had their fiber removed. So instead of eating like whole grain rice, like brown rice or wild rice, we take the fiber out and we eat white rice. Instead of eating whole wheat, we turn it into white flour. And the problem is that once you take the fiber out of a plant food, the starch can be broken down and absorbed so quickly, it's like eating pure sugar. And what that will do is it'll cause a spike in insulin levels. And it's true that if your insulin levels are constantly elevated, it prevents your body from burning fat. And so what ends up happening is that can promote weight gain. But it's even a little worse because when you actually look at what most Westerners are eating, they're eating refined carbohydrates that are loaded with grease. So the brain is craving carbohydrates because that's what it needs to run itself on. And it tells us, hey, go eat, go stoke up on some carbohydrate. But what do? We go out and we eat, something like a donut, which is white flour and grease, and insulin level, sugar level spikes, insulin goes up, sugar level goes down, and then suddenly we find ourselves hungry again. And instead of eating the high starch foods that our brain really and our body really want, we're eating proportionately more grease, which ends up going straight into our fat cells. So again, that promotes weight gain. And so what some, again, very poorly informed individuals have suggested is that, if you eliminate the carbs, it'll help you burn weight. And that's true to an extent, because it kind of puts the body on a starvation economy, and you have to burn protein, which is, again, very stressful from a metabolic standpoint. And studies have shown over time that low-carb diets are associated with higher risk for chronic disease, poorer performance on tests of mental function, which makes sense because you're not giving the brain what it needs. And it also is associated with a greater risk of all-cause mortality. When patients ask me about these low-carb diets, I'm like, okay, yeah, maybe you'll lose some weight, but what's the point of leaving a thin corpse? It's much better to eat whole plant foods. And that's why this term has come into use, whole food plant-based diet. Because what it's telling you is that you can eat donuts, potato chips, Coca-Cola, and be plant-based.
Right.
But it's a horrible and unhealthy way to be plant-based. You need to be eating whole plant foods because those plant foods have fiber in them. And it turns out that the absorption, that when carbohydrates are surrounded by fiber, they're in a sense protected. And that actually modulates the absorption of the carbohydrate, prevents your blood sugar levels from spiking too high, but it also prevents them from falling rapidly. And so it keeps your blood sugar level in a more stable range. You don't get hungry as often. Your brain is happy, your body is happy, and the fiber does all sorts of wonderful things when it gets to the colon and gets broken down by the bacteria in the colon. And that's why one of the most exciting new areas in human physiology research is looking at the microbiome. That is the makeup of the bacteria in our colons, because we're now understanding that they need fiber to do all of the great things for us that they could be doing. But that is a subject for another video.
So it sounds like maybe people are just confused about carbohydrates in general. They think of like donuts when they really should be thinking about potatoes and whole grains.
Exactly, and whole plant foods. Absolutely.
Right.
That and even potatoes. You know, when most people think of potatoes, they think of russet potatoes. But russet potatoes are essentially obese potatoes. They are potatoes that have been selected through selective breeding to be just loaded with starch. And so their starch to fiber ratio is thrown off. It's much better if you're going to use potatoes to use the smaller varieties like the Yukon Gold or the red potatoes. And if you cut into those potatoes, you'll notice that their flesh has a more waxy texture as compared to the sort of dry, crumbling texture of a russet. And that's because they have a much higher fiber content. And so they have a much better impact on our physiology because of the fiber that's in these potatoes. And the same is true of like sweet potatoes and yams, yucca, and so forth. Those other root vegetables have a lot of fiber in them. And so even though they have carbohydrates, that carbohydrate absorption is modulated by the starch, gives you a much better health profile. So again, the thing to remember about carbs is all carbs are not equal. The bad carbs are the processed carbs that have had the fiber removed. The good carbs are the whole plant foods that have the fiber in them. I do a lecture on chemistry for understanding nutrition, looking at carbohydrates, and I compare it to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. If you remember the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Dr. Jekyll was this wonderful physician who did great things for people, and when he was his normal self was a good doctor. But for some crazy reason, he concocted this potion that when he drank it, turned him into this monster called Mr. Hyde, who went around killing people. Well, that's very similar to what we do with plant foods. Plant foods in their normal, natural state are loaded with fiber, have good sources of carbohydrate, very healthy for us. But when we get our hands on them and we modify them and turn them into the nutritional version of Mr. Hyde, that's when they become bad for us and start to damage our health.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's a good point. We want to start thinking about food in terms of whole and process. I think
Right.
that's the key message, and it's really important.
Right, and to try to avoid refined sugars, as much as possible. Now, everybody's going to have the occasional piece of cake,
Sure.
or the occasional pie, or something like a dessert. Again, if you have it on your birthday, or at a special dinner party, that's not a problem. But when you're swilling down sodas all day, drinking lots of refined juices, or eating lots of candy and lots of sweets, that's when you start to really throw your physiology off, and it becomes very unhealthy. So you want to avoid not only the processed carbs, but also the refined sugars.
So I hope this helped clear things up about carbohydrates and low-carb diets. As you heard from Dr. Mills, Low carb diets are flat out dangerous. They increase your chances of chronic diseases, all-cause mortality, and decrease your mental performance, which you could say is a bit of a no-brainer, as a quarter of the energy you consume is used by your brain in the form of sugar, pun intended. Carbs are not the enemy, but not all carbs are created equally as well. You can't compare donuts to sweet potatoes. Whole plant-based foods are loaded in fiber, which helps your body steadily absorb the sugar from the food. It helps in satiation, and it helps build a healthy microbiome. So now that you guys know about all the benefits of a high-carb plant-based diet and the consequences of a low-carb animal-based diet, it still blows my mind that anybody would go through this just for some temporary weight loss. What are your guys' thoughts on low-carb diets? Are you for them? Are you against them? Post your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you guys want to check out another video I did with Dr. Milton Mills on omega-3s, I'll have that link in the description down below. And definitely give this video a like, share it around if you got something out of it, and subscribe for more videos with Dr. Mills. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.